Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know you have, as they say, you have a lot of choices in your life for the things you can do at 6 o'clock Pacific time in the evening. I'm glad you chose me over Joe Biden, although I'm sure he'll have some good things to say. I am finishing up a beverage of choice here. It's got, well, you can't really see it, but I hope you have your beverage of choice. And so we'll drink a toast when this is all over. I have my emergency glass of gin. I must say, my old man throat gets a little croaky, and so sometimes I need to resort to a little bit of gin. So thanks everybody for coming. I'm really excited about doing this. Ever since I found out that Emma was the ringleader behind a lot of this kelp culture stuff, and so tonight, you're going to get a full presentation. I decided to start from the letter A and go through Z about sea otters, kelp, and the relationship to tribal cultures, our work to bring them back, the full meal deal. So I'm going to get started here. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. And if you miss some things, either ask me in the chat in the Q&A at the end, or go back and replay it again because it's been recorded. And then through the miracle of modern technology, you can watch it over and over and over until you get tired of it. So let's see, here we are. There we are. Let's see. So I was just saying to Emma and Stephen that this is a view on the southern Oregon coast, looking south towards into the distance toward Cape Humbug Mountain. We're out on Cape Blanco, the westernmost tip of Oregon, and this little road that goes down to the shore is cut down through Cretaceous era conglomerates that anchor the point out there. So if you don't know what a Cretaceous conglomerate is, that's your homework for tonight. So let's start at the beginning. Let's meet Elakha. Elakha is this cute, furry little animal that is the object of our affection and attention. Elakha is a word in the Chinook trade jargon that means sea otter. And the Chinook trade jargon was derived from the languages of coastal Indians in the Pacific Northwest, as well as French and English and to some degree Russian, to enable fur traders and others to communicate in a land that was being exploited and explored by people from different nationalities. So there's actually a dictionary of the Chinook trade jargon that was published continuously beginning about 1830 through about 1860. And Elakha, or probably originally Elakha, was the word for sea otter. So sea otters live in the ocean nearly all the time, as their name implies. They do everything in the water: swim, eat, sleep, have sex, raise their babies. They paddle with their big hind feet that propel them, and they catch prey with their padded little front paws. They're the smallest of the marine mammals, way smaller than a harbor seal, the next largest, which is 350 pounds. These guys are more in the order of what I like to think of as a German Shepherd dog. I mean, they can be up to 80, maybe even 90 pounds. The southern sea otters are slightly smaller, maybe running more from 50 pounds for a female up to 70 pounds for a male, but they're not large, but they're definitely bigger than a river otter. They're very, very social, and you may know that. They float together in rafts, usually segregated by sex and sometimes by age. So they hang out together with the same cohort for just about their entire lives, which is one of the considerations we have in mind as we're thinking about capturing some of them to bring them to Oregon. So they're the only marine mammal that has no fat. All others, whales, the pinnipeds like seals and sea lions, they survive in a cold ocean as a mammal by having a coat of fat. But sea otters have no fat, no blubber. So how do they stay warm? They've got two things going for them. One is this extremely dense fur, about 1 million hairs per square inch, both the guard hairs and the underlayer, that keep the inside toasty warm against that outside cold. And it's that very dense fur that just about caused their demise. So they have to groom constantly. You'll see them either in person if you're up to Monterey or Morro Bay, or you'll see videos of them grooming and rubbing themselves. They groom frequently to keep air in the fur because that's their insulation. The other way they keep warm is that they're an eating machine. They are constantly eating high caloric shellfish food to feed their very high metabolism rate and keep their internal body temperature right around 100 degrees, slightly warmer than our internal body weight or our internal temperature. So they eat about 25 to 30% of their body weight a day in shellfish, which is, if you add it up over a year's time and across a population, that's a lot of seafood. They are very clever about doing this too. See over here, down here on the lower left, the sea otter's floating with a rock on its belly. Well, they, I'll show you here, they will whack their prey, and this guy's got a clam. They'll whack their prey against that rock on their belly until it cracks so they can break it open to eat with their teeth. And the reason they eat this shellfish is that they're efficient to catch. They don't move around. It's not like chasing a fish or something. And they're very high in calories for the unit amount that they catch. So they target shellfish, they bring it to the surface for eating. And fortunately for scientists, that's a good thing because they can accurately observe what and how much and when they eat. And that's how we know how much they eat during a day and their caloric intake. So as I said, they're a tool user. They can bring up several prey items at a time in little pouches under their armpits, as well as a rock to crack them on. Once they crack through the shell, they use their crunching teeth to crunch through the shells, and they've got enormously powerful jaws with these grinding molars. If you compare these teeth to the teeth of a river otter, the river otter's teeth are all like fangs everywhere, but these teeth are crunching and grinding for chewing through the shells. Sea otter moms raise one pup at a time. They don't have a litter, one pup at a time. And when that pup comes out, that's all the mom does is takes care of it. She has to teach it everything. She has to teach it how to dive, to catch its food, how to open it, what is food, even that, how to groom and otherwise behave as a sea otter. Without the mom, the little pup would soon die. So for the first few months, and actually through about 8 or 9 months, the sea otter moms have to eat for two. They're trying to capture enough calories, enough energy to feed herself, to stay warm and stay alive, and to feed the pup so it can grow. So for that reason, sea otter moms don't roam very far. They stay put. If needed, they can roam a mile or two in either direction to find food. But by and large, they stay put. And that's a principal reason why a natural repopulation is unlikely to Oregon and why sea otter populations grow so slowly, is that it isn't like they have a litter of pups and the pups disperse to far-flung places to look for new opportunities. They basically stay put. So we know that sea otters were once here, all the way between northern Japan, Hokkaido Island, off in the upper left there by the red arrow, all the way across the Aleutian Island chain, down the coast of North America, all the way down to central Baja California, the red arrow down there on the right. Through this region, nobody was counting, but the estimate is that there are maybe 200,000, maybe 300,000 animals together throughout this range. It's unknown how many animals were on the coast of Oregon. Estimates based on available habitat showed that there could have been as many as 4,000 animals, although we think that's a little high. So how do we know that they were in Oregon? Well, there are 6 language groups of coastal Indians that were on the coast, that with a lot of these little watersheds up and down the coast and limited north-south movement, there tended to be, the tribes tended to be localized in small regions along the coast. And each of those language areas had its own word for sea otter. So you'll see there at the north, the Chinook and Clatsop people up around the mouth of the Columbia River had Elakha or Elakha as their word for sea otter. And you'll see the other words for sea otter that were used by other tribes further south along the coast. So we also know that from the stories of the elders that were told to ethnographers in the 1920s and 1930s, they told of family stories of hunting sea otters or witnessing sea otters. Sea otters were woven into the fabric of cultural stories, much like coyote is woven into the fabric of stories of many tribes throughout the west and southwest of the U.S. Sea otter pelts were part of regalia and highly valued as a status symbol and used to trade for favors among families. Likewise, then later on, we have written accounts and reports from early explorers. Lewis and Clark mentioned in their journals more than 60 instances of sea otters being mentioned. Others, like Captain Robert Gray, or much later these newspaper articles, all indicate that sea otters were in fact here. There are two places on the Oregon coast that have place names today named for otters. On the left there, this Long Low Rock in Lincoln County up in the Central Coast is named Otter Rock. And in the Tillamook language of the day, which I cannot pronounce, it meant Sea Otter Rock. And likewise, further south, down near the mouth of the Rogue River in Curry County, is a place that today is known as Otter Point. And that also in the local language was known as Sea Otter Rock. And lastly, evidence in middens, which were mounds of shell remains that were of shells and bones that were cast aside near coastal villages. Those excavations in those sites show that sea otter bones are the second most numerous marine mammal bone after seals. There's almost an intact skeleton was recovered here, the one on the left, at this site in Bandon about 40 years ago. And then after having lived on the Oregon coast and been a part of both the ecosystem and the culture of Native people for thousands and thousands of years, suddenly they were gone. And this is a whole chapter that we could spend all evening talking about. But the short story is the beginning in 1742, a maritime fur trade for sea otters fueled a global rush for wealth. The Russians had really tumbled to the value of these pelts, trading them to China, and began after Vitus Bering came back from an expedition to map the far east of Russia toward what is now Alaska. He reported many sea otters, and so Russian companies formed. And that set off really a frenzy of global trade that ultimately involved Russia, Spain, England, and the new United States up in this corner of the world. So between 1742 and about the 1850, sea otters vanished from most of their range. By 1810, they were nearly gone across Alaska and British Columbia, but in California, hunting continued in San Francisco Bay, where there were thousands and thousands of sea otters alone, and then southward along the coast into Baja California, killed by Russian and American hunters who killed tens of thousands of otters. By the late 1830s, sea otters were largely gone and hunted out, and by the 1840s, the Russians sold their fort in Northern California to John Sutter, the guy that set off the gold rush, as it ironically that it turns out. And in 1867, Russia got out of Alaska when it sold Alaska to the United States. But animals survived in a few different pockets across their former range. Most were in the Aleutians and up in Alaska, but there was one little population down on the Big Sur coast down there in the lower right that survived in the Bixby Creek area. And these remnant populations provide the basis for today's populations that occur. And you can see relatively the population down there in the lower right on the California coast, and then the populations north and up across Alaska, with a big blank spot in the middle, and that's where Oregon is. So on the West Coast today, in California, there's around 3,000 animals that range from just south of Point Conception, north to just north of Santa Cruz at on the northern end of Monterey Bay. So there's about 3,000 animals here. On the Olympic coast in Washington, up near the Strait of Juan de Fuca, there's also pushing 3,000 animals today. Those were, let me back up with California. These are all descendant from that remnant population that survived at Bixby Creek, which you can see here with the little red explosion symbol. The animals in Washington, by contrast, were translocated from Amchitka Island out in the Aleutians in Alaska between 1969 and 1970 and released here at two different sites on the Olympic Peninsula. And that population's finally survived and is flourishing. So there's about 3,000 animals there. Up along Vancouver Island and onto the coast of British Columbia, there likewise was some translocations from Amchitka to here, and the population is estimated to be around 5,000 to 6,000 animals in this part of British Columbia. But it is sea otter heaven up in southeast Alaska. And there's probably 30 to 35,000 animals in the fjords and inlets and around the islands and rocks here in southeast Alaska. Some sea otters are seen in Oregon, usually a single sea otter. Every year or two, we'll see a male, what is probably a young male that is detached from the Washington population and floated south looking for a good time, as many young males like to do. We had on the left is a little guy that showed up around Thanksgiving a year and a half ago at Yaquina Head near Newport, and he was around 2 weeks before he succumbed to a shark bite. There was an attempt to translocate animals from Amchitka Island to Oregon, also during that era in which the other translocations took place in 1970 and 71. Those animals were a total of 93 animals. They seemed to survive and thrive for a couple of years, but by 1981, all were gone. We now believe that enough animals left the area soon after introduction that it left the surviving population too small to withstand the natural mortalities that will occur over time, and that eventually there just wasn't enough reproduction in the population of 20, and then eventually 18, and then 10, and then 9, and then 8 animals to survive. So we're trying to learn our lesson from this previous translocation and see if we can't succeed this time. But I guess at its root, why do we even care about sea otters? That's the question. Yes, they're cute. They really are. They're smart. They're just attractive. They're charismatic. But they're a keystone species. And we know about keystone species, whether wolves or bison or beaver, that keystone species significantly and disproportionately affect the structure and function of their surrounding ecological community. In fact, sea otters exemplify this keystone species concept. It was this young man here who, on your left, this is the young Jim Estes in 1970 out on one of the Alaskan islands. And it was he whose research really demonstrated how at these two islands, Amchitka and Shemya, the role of sea otters. What he found when he dove around the island of Amchitka, where sea otters were present, he saw this kind of landscape of a rich, productive kelp forest with all kinds of invertebrate and vertebrate life. When he went to Shemya, where no sea otters existed, what he found everywhere were urchin barrens and hardly any other marine life. He said it was like just this bell went off, that it was so clear what was going on. And study after study has basically confirmed his original finding. And that is that sea otters are guardians of the kelp. Sea otters eat the sea urchins, which would otherwise devour the kelp. And kelp is important, and you wouldn't be in this kelp collaborative if you didn't also understand this, that kelp is really the forest in the ocean. Whether it's these two major canopy-forming kelps, the bull kelp here on the left, or the giant kelp on the right, or all of the substory species of kelps and other macroalgae that grow. It's the basis of the nearshore ecosystem. So why do we care about kelp? And this is a story I have to tell when I'm out talking to people. It's like, kelp, what's that about? Well, it fuels the nearshore ecosystem. It creates this complex three-dimensional habitat that supports just an unimaginable variety of marine life. Part of that is because it slows the ocean currents and entrains eggs and larvae that are drifting by, often from far away, and causes those to aggregate and stay put in this area. The surface of the leaves and the stalks themselves and all that follows creates a substrate for grazers, which increases biodiversity and productivity. The detritus from the kelp drifting downstream makes those nutrients available to the entire marine ecosystem, as well as, we will see, the terrestrial environment too. And lastly, they buffer ocean waves and currents and protects ocean shoreline areas. In addition, we have now come to realize that kelp captures and stores carbon from the ocean. So study after study, and I'm not going to throw a lot of science graphs at you here tonight, but study after study shows the benefits to the ecosystem of sea otters and the way they can increase the productivity and diversity in kelp forests. Just look at all the trend lines of the arrows, up, 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 when sea otters are there over 20 years. And the difference between an absence of sea otters and the presence of sea otters on the abundance of rockfish. I mean, study after study just confirms this. So what we see on the surface of the ocean with this little guy peering over the leaves of this beautiful bull kelp, what we see below the surface is an entirely rich, just unimaginably complex ecosystem that is all fueled by the presence of sea otters. But there's more. As it turns out, kelp is critical to gray whales because the whales are feeding on the mysid shrimp and other organisms that thrive in and around kelp forests. Kelp sets the table for birds, whether they're birds plunging hunters like the heron over here, the blue heron on the right, or whether they're surface feeders on the left and in the middle, or whether they're diving like this common murre for little fishes. Kelp really sets the table for all manner of seabirds. And then when storms occur and rips these kelp out and throws the wrack up onto the beach, it brings all those nutrients, those ocean nutrients, up out of the marine environment onto the beach, where it's available for insects and other microorganisms, and provides the basis of a whole food chain that feeds off that, including these little shorebirds here on the lower right, all pecking away at the little insects that are eating on the kelp. And then on your right, you have things like this peregrine falcon, who then will go nab one of the shorebirds now and again. So we now know that kelp also helps fight climate change. We might not think of that as a major contribution, but it's true. Kelp removes tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. If you have kelp, it's going to remove about nearly a ton of carbon per acre versus an area with no kelp, which is only about 20 pounds per acre. So it's not insignificant at all. And that's one of the things we're trying to understand better is the contribution of restoring kelp beds along the Oregon coast to carbon sequestration overall. We now understand that sea otters benefit estuaries. Studies in Elkhorn Slough show that these small sea slugs and other grazers that keep the blades of eelgrass clean, if sea otters are not around, they'll get eaten by these little crabs. And once that's done, then the eelgrass cannot flourish. But along comes some sea otters, they pluck the little crabs, it frees up the little grazers to do their jobs, and suddenly we've got clean algae, healthy eelgrass that's thriving. And we know that eelgrass is crucial estuarine habitat for many species that also interact with the nearshore ocean. So you are undoubtedly aware of this, but kelp is under pressure along the West Coast. An urchin barren explosion seems to be occurring almost everywhere. And I say almost because, yes, there are areas where kelp continues to thrive, but the spread of urchin barrens is really alarming. And these are just a collection of a few headlines and stories over the last few years about the response to urchin barrens and what can be done. And again, that leads into the fact that behind all of this is a changing ocean. A marine heat wave of beginning in 2013 seemed to be related to a massive regional die-off of sea stars along the West Coast. And the sea stars, especially this guy on the right, this poor little demised sunflower sea star, they are also predators of sea urchins. And once these guys were gone, and you'd have a big recruitment of purple urchins, as we did in 2014, suddenly you've got a recipe for the spread of sea urchins everywhere. So now that we've kind of looked at some of the factors behind what we're doing and why we're doing it, let me tell you a little bit about the Elakha Alliance as we step on stage here. So as I said, the Elakha is a Clatsop Chinook word for sea otter. Our organization was conceived in the late 1990s by this man here, Dave Hatch, who was a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. And it was he who really began, as a missionary almost, out promoting the idea that sea otters had once been here. They had incredible ecological importance and cultural importance to coastal tribes. Dave passed away in 2016, but a number of us got together who had known Dave and decided to carry on his mission and formed a nonprofit, the Elakha Alliance, in 2018. And since then, so we're a relatively new organization. We adopted a strategic plan in August 2019 that's been guiding us, although we're right in the middle of revising that and assessing it. And we became an official 501c3 in April of 2020. So our vision is an Oregon coast 50 years from now, where our children and grandchildren enjoy and benefit from a healthy sea otter population, a robust marine ecosystem, and a thriving coastal economy. And those things are all interrelated. This is looking north, by the way, from the tip of Cape Blanco, looking north. And this little, right in the middle there, almost below the rainbow, is a rock formation that's known locally as Gull Rock. And there are some Indian family stories that tell of hunting sea otters out around Gull Rock. Our mission is to restore a healthy population of sea otters to the Oregon coast, and in the process, help make Oregon's marine ecosystem more robust and resilient. So yes, once again, we are interested in bringing sea otters back, but the larger purpose is to make Oregon's marine ecosystem more robust and resilient. We have two key strategic objectives and then a third. The first, on the upper left, is to assess the scientific and economic feasibility of our mission. The one on the right is to help the region reach consensus on restoration, which basically means build public support. And then if we can do those two things, Then we'll identify some areas where sea otters ought to be released and proceed with restoration in carefully chosen places. Knowing all the while, though, I would say that it is not we, the Elakha Alliance, that is going to be doing this alone. We're going to be doing this with many partners, and principally with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which ultimately has jurisdiction. As one of our first steps, though, we raised the money for and commissioned a major scientific feasibility study that thoroughly investigates all aspects of whether or not it's feasible to bring sea otters back to Oregon. And you can go to our website. You could read and download all these different chapters. We're cleaning all these chapters up a little bit with a professional editor, and we hope to publish it as a book and then have it live online permanently. But you can go to our website and check out all of these different chapters that help back up our conclusion that bringing sea otters back to Oregon is likely to succeed if we do our job. The feasibility study concludes that reintroductions are, in fact, a successful conservation tool. It highlights that estuaries may be an important reintroduction environment, and that the obvious, which is return of sea otters, will have many and direct and indirect effects. The study points out that a number of economic, social, and regulatory issues must be considered. We've also been following up our science work by holding annual sea otter science symposiums. We just recently, in October, held our fourth such symposium. The very first one in 2019 was in person, but then COVID hit, and we've been doing the others virtually. But all of them are recorded presentations with all aspects of sea otter science, marine ecology pertaining to sea otters, and kelp forests. And you can find those at our Elakha Alliance YouTube channel. So you don't even have to read about this stuff. You can listen to somebody else talk about it. Another way that we're building then with our second strategic objective, public support, is before COVID, we did a lot of presentations and outreach one-on-one, and you can imagine what that must have been like. Then COVID came, and we had to do some other things, but now we're back again doing presentations. And here's some of our crew in the upper right at the Oregon Zoo this summer, right by the sea otter exhibit, talking about our work. Along with our science symposiums, we've been doing a tremendous number of webinars on all kinds of subjects related to sea otters, kelp, and marine ecology of the nearshore environment. So if you're interested in any of this, you ought to just open up the YouTube channel and cruise the selections. I would recommend, there's one down here on the lower right, the history of abalone. Abalone is a big deal in California, and as it turns out, very central to this story. And a woman has written a really interesting book about the history of abalone on the California coast. So check out our website. It's our goal to have the world's best website devoted to sea otters. And it may or may not achieve that, but that's what we're trying to do. We've got some great business partnerships going. This is one that I particularly like, with the Oregon Beverage Recyclers Co-op, which runs the statewide bottle return program. And they've donated some money to us. We've helped promote them, and they put our logo and a big picture of a sea otter on one of their transport trucks that goes driving around the Portland area. So that's fun to see that. We also last year in 2022 held a Sea Otter Brew Challenge, and we're going to do it again on April 15th of this year. The drill is that we recruited, last year was 13, this year it's 14 breweries, and asked them to brew a special beer using Maris Otter malt, which is a kind of dark malt that comes out of England. And so we got these fabulous brews last year. One was here in the upper left with the bright colored artwork. They actually use seaweed in the brew. But we had a great time at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, and we're going to do it again this year. A lot of fun. And we can do it because we can do it, and it's Oregon, so it's fun. And this past summer, we participated in a giant art event on the beach at Lincoln City to focus on the marine environment with this huge sand drawing of a kelp forest and a sea otter. And just for scale, you can see the shadows of all the people that were standing around in the early morning sunlight. Here are just some of our partners and collaborators that we've been working with over the last few years. It's really been fun to get to work with all these folks and have them rally around the cause. So our to-do list is fairly lengthy, as you might imagine. We're revising our strategic plan because what we thought we were going to do in 2019 pretty much worked out, but conditions have changed. So we're adjusting our strategic plan and looking ahead to 2028. We've begun to collaborate with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and California partners a lot more, because as you may know, last July, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service completed and released their own assessment of the feasibility of returning sea otters to the West Coast, which both created the foundation for them to be talking about sea otters along the Northern California coast, but it also created a fair sense of public excitement about it. We've still got to refine and increase our public outreach and community engagement, particularly at the community level on the Southern Oregon coast, and to work with fishermen, crabbers, and other stakeholders directly. We've begun to do that, but we need to do more. There are some science tasks that we need to do, some research that needs to be done indicated by the feasibility study, but we won't do necessarily, but we're certainly going to help others in the research community do it by helping to raise money and support their work. We've got a couple of economic impact studies that are underway, one that's underway and one that we're still looking for funding on, really zeroing in on what could be the travel and tourism impacts on the Southern Oregon economy if sea otters were back, and what would be the potential impact of sea otters on the shell fisheries that occur on the Southern Oregon coast at that local scale. So we're already starting to talk to our partners about a reintroduction plan, framework plan. That's going to take a while. And all of that is leading towards eventually the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service going through their required environmental review process. So the big questions we get asked is, when will we reach our destination, and when will sea otters actually return? I'd like to know the answer myself. My response is, we don't have a deadline. And what we need to do is get this right. But given the trajectory, the work that's gone on, the work that we can see happening in the future, I think it's reasonable that we will be mounting an operation to bring sea otters into the Oregon coast in 5 years. It may take a year longer than that. I don't see it being much shorter than that, but that's about the time frame. And if that's true, then it means the Elakha Alliance will have achieved this within about a 10-year period. Contrast that with the Yurok tribe and many partners returning condors to the skies over Northern California. That was a 20+ year effort. So 10 years to bring sea otters back is not unreasonable. So that's my hope. That's my goal. And with that, I'd say go to our website, consider joining our effort. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can donate if you are able to do that. And if you became a monthly supporter of even a couple of bucks, that would be great. So, because that all takes money. So with that, I'm going to stop and answer some questions.